The domain registration it's like licensing your car. You want to have www.widgets.com. You need to register that somewhere. It needs to be owned by somebody, preferably you and your organization. Some hosting providers or some consultants that you might work with, they might say they'll do all this for you, but they might also retain ownership of the domain registration. That would be like having your auto mechanic own the registration for your car, which is probably a bad idea, as you can imagine. Whereas web hosting is the actual hosting of the website. It has to exist somewhere on the internet. Somebody has a computer connected to the internet where the website will live, and that's what the web hosting is all about. And that's actually completely distinct from the address. Although, pretty much everybody who provides hosting also provides domain registration for simplicity. But it's, especially when you get into migrating, if you need to change hosts for any reason, it's much, 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 much better if you have the domain registration independently controlled through a separate organization. It does, migrating is complicated, period. And there are a few different sorts of hoops you have to go through when your registration is somewhere else. But it's well worth it. You've got to go through hoops anyway, and you definitely want to maintain your own independent control over over the domains that you own versus where they're hosted. So, I thought before I got into the guts of what I was asked to speak about, I'd drag a chair across the room. No, there we go. That's better. I drew this up during the break because I thought it might answer some questions that some people had. Because if you're coming at this fighting against a wall of jargon, you haven't been doing it for, since the time that these technologies were invented, not too long ago, then it can be very confusing. And hopefully this doesn't raise more questions than it answers. Anyway, this is just a little compare and contrast about the old HTML versus CMS. My big triple line here just separates the top and the bottom. HTML is the fundamental language that all web pages are written in, and there's a very simple example. What it means is start a paragraph, the contents of this paragraph is the word hello, close off the paragraph, start a new paragraph, contents of this paragraph is the word bye, and close off this paragraph. So this is an HTML snippet. You could save it as a file on a web server somewhere. And if you went to call up this file in your web browser, Firefox, Internet Explorer, Chrome, Safari, whatever you use, you would browse to this page and it would look like this, one paragraph and another paragraph. So there's all these HTML codes that will look very strange if you don't know what they all mean. But the end result is they tell your browser how to draw the page for you. That's what HTML is. It's a language that web browsers understand, basically. A CMS is a bit different. In a CMS, like you were watching earlier, inside your own web browser, you get a little box. And you can type the word hello and bye if you wanted, or whatever the contents of your page that you want it to be. And you click the save button inside the web browser because your content management system is giving you this special interface and letting you control the page by doing this instead of doing that. And when you click save, whatever you've typed in here, it's going to go into a database. Pretty much all content management systems do have a database underlying them, with a few exceptions. And then, in your browser, when you go to visit the page, what happens is the database and a page template that the content management system also manages for you. The database contents, so this stuff, and the page template, they all get put together, and you end up with that web page with the two paragraphs in it. That's as simple way as I could think to explain the difference at a technical level. Any questions about that? Did that help? Are you now all completely asleep? No? Good. Anyway, so, yeah, about me. Yeah, about more than 14 years ago, I did get a degree in journalism and philosophy. Not your usual start in the technology business, but if you think about the time, what year it was, well, 15 years ago now, 1996, the World Wide Web was just taking off, well, like this. So it was an easy time to get into technology, no matter what you were doing, and that's what happened to me. And later on, I co-founded Freeform Solutions. As Tony said, we're a not-for-profit organization. Our mission is to help other not-for-profits use technology. We are funded by the organizations that we work with. We charge low consulting fees for our time. We are also currently in the third and final year of a Trillium Foundation grant to do outreach about open source things like what I'm doing now. So that's me. And there are 1,001 CMSs out there. Not so many as there used to be. About 5 or 6 years ago, there really were maybe 1,000, and it was somewhat hard to know where to begin. There's been a bit of a shakedown over the last 5 years or so. There's only a few that really matter. But if you do broad searches on the web, you'll find CMSs coming out of the woodwork everywhere. There are 3 main approaches to any CMS that you might find yourself using. There are 3 main families. There's proprietary or commercial systems where you're buying software, or you're buying the right to use software, so you're paying per month, or you might pay a lot of money for a particular piece of software that you install on a web server. So this is kind of like, if you know Salesforce.com, some not-for-profits use Salesforce for managing volunteers and things like that, and their donors. You pay Salesforce per month and you can use their service. And you can pay some commercial CMS providers per month, or whatever their arrangement is, whatever their pricing structure is, and use their CMS that they're providing for you. Or you can buy it outright. There are some out there that you can buy and download it, the same as you might buy a piece of Adobe software or Microsoft software. The much more common kind of CMS is open source CMS. These are the WordPress, Joomla, and Drupal are the 3 that matter. Well, I shouldn't say that. They're all wonderful. But in terms of market share, or however you measure sort of relevance and prevalence of these things, WordPress is number 1 by far. Then comes Joomla, and then comes Drupal. And I'll talk about them in more detail later. And the third option is build your own CMS. About 6 years ago or so, even 4 years ago, it was pretty common to hear people say every so often when you'd be talking about, should I use Joomla or should I use Drupal? And somebody would pipe up at the back of the room and say, oh, you should build your own. And gradually those people have been laughed out of town. But there are still some people who want to build their own. There are some good reasons to do that if you're General Electric or something like that, but no one here is, so I wouldn't recommend that. As was explained, it can be very expensive. So, proprietary and commercial CMSs, I just did the general overview of the 3, but there's an analogy I'd like to present to you, and that is commercial CMSs are a lot like renting. You might want to rent this apartment. Maybe you don't really care about gardening. You got patio stones and no garden. Maybe the public transit's really important to you. You're renting, you can't make any changes, no renovations. But on the other hand, if, tap leaks, landlord's got to fix it. There's some pluses to renting, especially if it's a good situation for you. And we're all we understand that kind of assessment and benefit analysis when you're thinking about renting versus buying. And commercial CMSs are a lot like renting. Now, for example, this is an example screenshot of a commercial CMS called Squarespace. And it looks very nice. It gives you a bunch of options. If you don't want these options, if you want different options, then that's too bad. This is what the landlord's giving you. That's what you're stuck with. But if that's good enough for you, and the price is right, it could be a good deal. Now there's open source content management systems. So they are a lot like buying a fixer-upper. Who here's a handy person? Yeah? Yeah, they're a lot like buying a fixer-upper. What do I mean by that? I'm by no means trying to make them look bad. We use open source content management systems, especially Drupal, virtually exclusively in the work that we do with not-for-profits, but they require some tender loving care. When you first install Drupal, after you're done installing it, or after you press the button as was described on your website control panel, and Drupal's installed for you, and then you go to your website, this is what it looks like. Now, if that doesn't look like a website that needs some tender loving care, I don't know what does. So it's a real fixer-upper. But on the plus side, as was explained, there's all these people all over that are doing work on making the technology better and providing free modules and enhancements and other things. And so if you are a bit of a handy person, or if you don't mind paying a general contractor to come help out, then it can be an excellent option. And then to build your own. Well, we've covered renting and buying, so which shelter arrangement does build your own correspond to? I think it's kind of like Survivorman. Because you got to build your own. You're starting with nothing. So if you can build your own, that's great. It's going to take you a long time to, get to a whole house, but if you're General Electric, it's no problem. What everybody wants, of course, is a nice house with a nice garden and everything else. Well, what everybody wants is, in my opinion, it's too huge and fancy and custom to get out of a rental. You got to know what you're going into if you get a commercial content management system. It's going to have some limitations. You want to go that route if you've done a good assessment and you know that it's a good choice for you given your needs. What everybody wants to get to this kind of a house, you can get there with a fixer-upper, but it's obviously going to be more or less work depending on how competent you are and what kind of help you have. And getting this far is, of course, a huge mountain of work if you're trying to do it yourself. But, you could, maybe. So, open source content management systems. The three biggies are WordPress. WordPress really came almost out of, well, not quite out of nowhere, but there was Joomla and Drupal and a bunch of others. And a few years ago, then there was WordPress too. And because WordPress became so huge and the most popular system, because it did one thing really, really, really well. If you wanted to have a blog, then WordPress was it. You could install WordPress as your basis for your website, and you'd have a blog automatically. And there was pretty much nothing else you had to do. These days, it has a few more features than blogging, but it retains that really easy, really straightforward way to use it that made it really popular. So it is very easy to use. It's especially good for blogs, still is, but I have a personal website of my own that has absolutely no blog features whatsoever. It's built entirely on WordPress, so it can do things besides blogs as well. WordPress is not as well suited to community-oriented websites that have a lot of interactive features. What I mean by that is if people are logging into your website, sharing information with each other, sharing information with you, if you have, if in your database you want to keep records of, what kinds of services and other things that they have interacted with you doing, what events they've been to, or what services they've had. WordPress is not the best choice for that kind of thing. But if you just want to put a website in front of people with some information and you're not looking for a big community or interaction, then it's certainly going to work very well. And it has some modules that add features. I should explain what a module is. But it's a very common term in the CMS landscape. You'll run into it over and over again. And generally, it means something extra, some extra thing that you download or in some cases purchase, and you add it to your CMS. Imagine if when you bought Microsoft Office it did not come with a spell checker, but you had to buy the spell checker module and then you could spell check your documents. That's kind of what a module is like in a CMS, although CMSs do have spell checkers built in. But it's that idea that there's some specific piece of functionality, some feature that the software doesn't have, and you can get a module that will add that feature to your system. And WordPress has a growing number of modules that are available that let you push it well beyond just the domain of blogs where it started.
In WordPress speak, they're called plugins.
Yeah, there's...
Go research it, look for WordPress plugins.
Yeah, that's one of the annoying things. In Joomla, they're called components, but they also have something else called modules as well. I'm used to just talking about modules, because I think a lot of techie people think that way, unless they're very specifically tied to a particular platform. But this is a very good point. Thank you. Drupal.
Before we go on to the
yes.
next one, I just want can you say more about blog-like websites and what might be the advantages for
blog-like websites?
Versus, I'm just curious about
blog-like, I would, what would you say blog-like?
I've been struggling to describe what really a dynamic website is to the people I work with. I do not know how to make them understand, but recently I thought about it like this. So think about going to a newspaper website, like the TorontoStar.com, right? And Julian explained that in an HTML site, your content is in the document, right? But in a content management system, your content is in a database. So if you go to the star.com, there is not an HTML file that's holding every single article. Like you go to the website, you go back 10 minutes later, the homepage is different because maybe there's a new article and then a whole bunch of related new articles. So it's delivering information based on various criteria, right? And so that is really kind of what a content management system does. So in the case of a blog, you just get little snippets of information, you can categorize them and sort them and have them displayed by most recent or most popular, and you can do you can just deliver your information in new and different ways than having a static, About Us page that, maybe you change every 3 years. Mm-hmm. That's kind of it. Does that help?
WordPress is tailored to that kind of interaction, or that kind of model of how you want your web page to be. And if you remember the example we looked at on the sample page at the bottom, it had a comments box. By default, WordPress wants to put a comment box at the bottom of everything, because that's what blogs do. You read something, and then maybe you want to comment. So everything about WordPress out of the box, without changing any settings, will just give you a perfectly, wonderfully working blog with all of those kind of blog-ish things, commenting and tagging based on categories. You can categorize everything you put into the website, and then you get this little sidebar with all the categories, and people can click the category name and go to all the articles of that category. And that just happens in WordPress without even thinking about it. Of course, if you're not doing that kind of website, then you just turn those things off. But by default, that's how it's designed. You had a question?
Oh, I was going to say that the example that Anna showed, I thought was a blog-like website, just long pages, comments.
Yeah, there's graphic design features that people think of about blogs, about the verticality of the pages and other things like that too. Joomla, been around the longest of any of the major three systems, although in a former life it was known as Mambo, Mambo. I once had someone ask me at a conference I was speaking at afterwards. She came up and we were talking about stuff, and she said, "I just have one question. Why do all of these things have such stupid names?" And the reason, actually, there's two reasons. One is because all the good names for URLs are taken. So if you want a good name, you got to make one up. The other reason is that, well, because of that, people wanting their own unique name, they borrow names from other languages. So Joomla is, I think, a Swahili word, meaning community or circle or something like that. So they thought it was a cool name for what they were trying to do as an open source project, and it was available as a domain, so they took it. And so that's why they have all these stupid names. Anyway, Joomla is pretty easy to use, although I don't think anyone who's used both Joomla and WordPress would ever say that it's easier than WordPress. WordPress is pretty darn simple. But Joomla is still pretty easy. It's very attractive. It got a lot of followers early on because when you install it and you log in and you look at it, it's very nice to look at. It seems very easy to find your way around. Although some parts of it can be difficult to use. It's designed for standard public-facing websites. So because of the pedigree of Joomla, because its predecessor, Mambo, was so old, it's like over 10 years old, I think, or about that. That's kind of before blogs even existed. Like, who talked about blogs before, about 2001, 2002, around then? So like, they were just coming on the scene then. If you were making websites before that time, then you were just making websites. So Joomla is really good if you just want to make a website. It's got some pages, it looks nice, it's easy to update the content, but you're not necessarily concerned about all those blog-like features we were just talking about tagging and categories and comments and so on. Although you can do that in Joomla now as well. Of course, it's added the capability to do that. But it's kind of the flip side of WordPress. You've got to find ways to add in those features, whereas in WordPress, if you don't want them, you've got to find ways to turn them off. It has modules or components, as they call them, that add features in the same way. But a lot of the components in the Joomla world are commercial. Joomla has this history. The company that made the Mambo predecessor to Joomla was a commercial company in Australia, I believe. And because it was a commercial company, they released this open source platform, but they encouraged other companies to develop modules or add-ons, components for it. So there's this whole commercial heritage in the Joomla ecosystem where a lot of the really useful components that you might want to use, you got to pay money for. It's not a lot. It's like $50 a year for this one, or $50 for lifetime license for others. Usually not a lot, but there is a whole commercial aspect to the open source community there, which is not a bad thing necessarily. Again, you just got to assess your own needs and find something that's useful for you, and if it's the right price, then that's okay. Drupal. Drupal is the number 3 most popular system, I would say. It is somewhat easy to use. The fixer-upper website screenshot that I showed you, that was the default Drupal web page after you've installed it. No one, I think, would say that it's as easy as Joomla or WordPress, but there's a reason for that. And that's because it's not designed to do blogs or public-facing web pages or any particular kind of website at all. It's really designed as a flexible platform for any kind of website. That's why we prefer to freeform for the systems that we do with the clients that we work with, because when they dream up the next thing they want their website to do, we don't have to go rebuild their website. We can usually find a way to make it happen in Drupal. And that's the number 1 reason really why we use it. So it has modules as well, like the others. But Drupal modules are a bit different, and it's something to understand if you're assessing these systems and trying to, you might find a certain module for Joomla or a plugin for WordPress, and you might look for the corresponding one in Drupal, trying to do a comparison between the two. That might not happen, depending on what you're looking at, because modules in Drupal, because it's this flexible platform, the modules in Drupal are designed in such a way that they extend the website and they might extend other modules. So, and they tend to be very small in the features that they provide. So, well, I'm going to go out on a limb because I don't actually know the whole Joomla component space well, but I can imagine that there's a Joomla component out there for doing mapping. If you wanted to put a map on your website, and you wanted to have, say, all the locations that your agency operates, or some geographic information that you wanted to provide to people. So you could maybe add a component to your website that would give you a map, and you could type in the addresses and the locations, and they would show up on the map. That might be the whole plugin or the whole module. In Drupal, that would take about 3 modules to do that, at least 2. Because you'd have one that would let you handle entering the locations with their latitude and longitude. And you'd have a completely separate module that did the mapping. And you'd need the 2 of them working together. And that sounds like a lot of work, but it's actually a really brilliant idea, in our opinion, because it means that that map isn't tied to that specific location information for that one purpose. If you want to add another module onto the map with some other information, that's no problem, because the modules are made to talk to each other very easily, usually. So you can start, this is the flexibility that I talked about. This is why we prefer Drupal for the larger, more complex projects that we do. That's about it. These are the folks who uploaded photos to Flickr under the Creative Commons license that I was able to use for free. So thank you to them, whoever they are. And that's me. Thank you.